Hi there, Linda Barron's here. I just thought we'd have another chat today and share some thoughts with you. Um, how many times have you been in a situation where you really are arguing with somebody and you just can't see their view? And how many times have you wanted to say or said, "What are you thinking?" Or "What were they thinking?" It's actually kind of the wrong question. It has a lot to do with how they are thinking, with what kinds of information they're paying attention to. So I'm sure you've heard the story. If you haven't, here it goes. Is the story of the blind men and the elephant. And one or two of them are down by the feet, and they describe it like, "Oh, it's I put my hands around that. It's a post." Another one is by the tail, and they grab the tail, and this is, "Oh, it's a rope hanging here." And then another one is by the big ears. And oh, this is a big flat thing that looks like a big leaf, feels like a big leaf, of course, not looks like my usual language. And another one feels the trunk and says, "Wow, this must be a big, long worm or a snake or, oh, what it is, it's a pipe." Okay, so you get the point. They're all looking at different things. Well, so, we all access different information. There's no way that you can see everything. And if I ask you to look around the room or wherever you are, there are certain things that you will notice and other things you won't. And then might be asked to look again and you would notice some other things. Well, we're talking about the world of things, but there's also the inner world of ideas and other kinds of information. So, what are some of the categories of information that Carl Jung identified? Well, first he said there's sensing and intuiting. He said it's sensation and intuition. But what we've come to realize in most recent years is that what he described as extroverted sensing or introverted sensing are, two very different kinds of information. So it's all about the kinds of information. Now, this has to do with what do you attend to, because you can't attend to everything, even if you're able to see it all or able to feel it all or smell it all. So we like to use some pretty plain English words to describe these different forms of accessing information and the kind of information that each pays attention to. So the first one let's talk about is experiencing. You think about looking around the room and you really notice something. And you notice, maybe if you pay attention, you can smell something or you can hear some noises. You can see what is really there. You can hear what's really being, whatever the noises are, music, somebody talking, the fan, who knows. Okay, so that's attending to the external world, which we call experiencing. You're experiencing what is really there and noticing a lot of usually a lot of detail. Now, there's too much to notice at once, so you might not notice it all, but it's the specific information that you attend to is very tangible. It's real, if you will, in the way we usually talk about real. So, what you physically observe is one simple form of what Jung called extroverted sensing. We call it experiencing. It's about immersing yourself in the current time context and really noticing what's there. And then also a little bit about anticipating the future. Well, here's an opportunity to do something with what's there. Now, there's another kind of information you might bring to the table, and that is information where you see something. If you look around the room, maybe something reminds you of somebody else. And you start to think about your mother or your friend that was your friend's favorite color or whatever it is. And so the whole experience comes forward. In this process, we call reviewing. You wind up having access to all the various pieces of information that are connected to that connected to from your past experiences with a certain particular experience. So we can access that kind of information. We all could do these things, but we might prefer to pay attention to that information so that you say, well, it was always done this way. Or why should we change it? Because we know it worked that way. Or let's check it and see how it did before, and now let's do it differently because it didn't work. So this kind of information Jung called introverted sensing. So it's the kind of information where you look inward, you just access the information, just comes to you, and you sometimes it's so deep that it's like you may not even remember a specific thing, but it is how it is, and it is how it was. So would be better to say. So Jung called this introverted sensing because we're looking internally for that information, or it just comes to us. I'm sure you've all had that experience when you um, look at somebody who looks like somebody else that you know in the past, and almost everything comes forward, and you have these experiences of good feelings from that person, or sometimes bad feelings, and then that's not so happy making. So you recognize something in relationship to the way it was. We do this all the time. But in any situation, we may not be paying attention to that information. We may be accessing different kinds of information. Okay, so what's another kind? Well, sometimes what we do is we're talking about something, and or you look around the room and you see something and you're saying, oh, we could build a whole course around this thing that I see here. Or we could go do this, and you're not even in the room at all anymore. You're just saying, I I see this crystal behind me, and I'm thinking, I'm now noticing that, oh, these these things, we could be using these things as symbols for something else. So lots of variations on a theme, or not variations on a theme, things that are from outside the context that come into your awareness that are in some way tangentially related. When you're accessing that kind of information, we call it interpreting. We're interpreting the meanings, or sometimes interpreting what hasn't been said. So we're seeing that in between stuff that sometimes other people aren't seeing. And then they say, what, can't you stay on topic here? What are you talking about? Well, it might be a very relevant thing to bring into a meeting, for example. So this kind of information is very helpful. And some of us are especially gifted at accessing that and interpreting that. And so you see two people with this kind of feeling of process, which Jung called extroverted intuiting. You're picking up uh, patterns, emerging patterns, you're noticing things. And so you might be talking to somebody and say, oh, and yeah, and oh, and oh, and yeah, and oh, and oh, and yeah, and it's going on and on. Okay. Now there's another pattern, another kind of information that we can access. And it's the kind of information that often comes to us in the shower. I call it a shower moment, that all of a sudden you have a solution to something. And if this is something that you're especially talented at, you may have solutions come to you about problems that haven't been identified. Now, you've all had this kind of experience where you put together something, some idea, just flash of insight about something, and it's oftentimes far removed in time and space. You don't have to be in the context. It just comes to you. And this was a process that we call um, envisioning, because often you get a sense of the future, of what will be, not what so much what might be, but it feels so clear that it will be like that. And then that becomes like a whole brain dump in a way. It all just comes in, and you get this picture. You may access symbols that are powerful representations of all of things, so that people can relate to them as symbols. Very often this process that we call envisioning involves that kind of foreseeing of what will happen um, in relationship to some event that like my friend had father's surgery, and she thought something, got this sense, this picture, this sense that something would go wrong. She also luckily got the sense that it would be okay. And it did. It happened exactly like that. She told me about it because we were teaching together. So this is what Jung called introverted intuiting. So when you're doing one of these magnet processes, the introverted sensing or the introverted intuiting, or yeah. So when you're doing any of these processes, you may be kind of disengaged from what's actually there in the moment, and hard to interact at that time. So we have these different kinds of talents, in a way, for accessing and paying attention to information. And when you're talking with somebody, they may be thinking about something differently. Now, it may be that they're thinking about something differently because it's a particular issue, that position you want to take. Let's don't even mention politics, but something like that, that you have a particular worldview. Um, but if you start to recognize that it's not so much about the kinds of information we were just talking about, but that if you realize that people access different kinds of information, they tend to seek out different kinds of information, and you have a sense of the cognitive processes that go along with that, that there are these different processes, it's not a big leap to recognize that that person you're having an argument with is probably seeing something different than you. And oh my, if you could just switch to be curious and find out what were they seeing. Then you can start to begin to integrate your differences, or to at least stop being angry. So I hope this is helpful. This information is from the lens that we call cognitive dynamics, and it's very, very deep. There's more. We'll do another session on that at a different time. But the cognitive dynamics is so valuable to remember that we see things differently. We see different information. We get information. And all of that information can be very valuable and very relevant. And if you're thinking about how you're working with someone else, you may like to do things differently. So I hope this has been helpful to you. And I sometimes hope to see you in our cognitive dynamics courses. Well, thank you very much.